There is a crisis unfolding across the African continent. And this is a crisis that is very significant because it is not discussed. So while the world is focusing on economics, is focusing on politics, technology, there's something very fundamental to who we are as Africans that is sleeping away, is going away. And often there is not much notice, and that is our languages. Our languages are getting extinct, our languages are dying. So I've been reflecting on this because I believe it is time we have an honest conversation and talk about it. And this conversation should not be filled with panic or some simple nostalgia, but they should be grounded in clear observation, some difficult truth, and genuine curiosity about what the future might hold. I want us together to examine the facts and look at them step by step and maybe ask ourselves the questions that truly matter. Um, to understand the problem, we can begin with the astonishing reality of Africa's linguistic heritage. We know Africa is a continent and is a home to roughly 2,000 distinct languages. That is nearly one third of all languages spoken by humanity today. Nigeria alone has more than 500. Cameroon, they have nearly 300. And these languages range from the melodic tonal systems of West Africa to these extraordinary click consonants of the Khoisan people in South Africa. I'm sure you've heard of them. And this diversity, it represents one of the humanity's greatest intellectual treasures, in my opinion, because each language is not simply a different way of saying the same things. Languages, they are different windows into reality itself. They carry these unique concepts, um, philosophies, moral frameworks, and the knowledge systems that have been developed over centuries of lived experiences. We know languages, they tell us how different communities understood time, family, nature, and the spiritual world in ways that may have no direct equivalent elsewhere. So languages are pretty important, and the issue that they are getting extinct slowly, I think, is concerning for all Africans. But as one examines the current situation more closely, I, you will realize this troubling pattern that I think becomes very impossible to ignore, especially when you look at Africa. Because the truth is, as I was saying, hundreds of these languages, particularly the smaller ones, let me be clear on that, they are classified as vulnerable or sometimes endangered or critically endangered. And the global linguistic surveys they also show that up to 10% of African languages could cease to be spoken within 10 to 80 years if this pattern keeps on being like this. And this is a part of a larger global phenomena where languages are vanishing at a rate of roughly one every 2 weeks. And this is troubling. And so I want to be precise here. And I want to be precise because I think accuracy matters and because nuance is very important. So, what I'm saying here does not mean that African languages as a whole is dying. I think that is very far from reality because we know some of our major languages are thriving and they are expanding. Swahili continues to grow as a lingua franca across East Africa. Hausa, Yoruba, Zulu, Amharic, and Wolof. Each of these languages, they have millions of speakers. They have strong institutional support. So these languages are living, they are breathing, and they are adapting to the modern world. And I think they serve as a powerful unifying force. So it is important to notice this. But the real crisis is actually concentrated among the smaller languages. These languages that are not spoken by communities, I mean, they're spoken by communities or hundreds of people, or in some cases, maybe just a handful of people, especially elders. I want to give you some concrete examples that I think would illustrate this human dimension in the story. For example, in South Africa, there is the language Nu. I think it's Nuu, if that's how you spell it. It's one of the last Khoisan language with its characteristic click sounds. So it stands critically endangered, and for years it has hovered over the edge with only few elderly fluent speakers. But what strikes me and makes me happy about it is that even here, there is a quiet revival efforts that are going on behind the scenes. I'm sure you have seen some young members of the Khoisan community that are beginning to learn the language again, and that they are supported by this project that connect the language to the land rights and cultural heritage. So this is a good thing. You go up a little bit in Ethiopia, there is the Ongota language that is spoken by fewer than, I think, 10 people, fewer than 10 people. You can imagine. The linguists, they consider this language as a language isolate. It is unrelated to any other family on earth. So its potential loss would mean a permanent disappearance of a complete way, a complete unique form of a human expression. You can now imagine across Cameroon and different other parts of Central and West Africa, you will find dozens of languages in similar way, and each with very small speaker populations, and they're struggling against the pressures of modernization and slowly disappearing just like that. And this brings us to an important question. Why is this happening? What forces are driving this quiet shift? Uh, and my understanding of this when I try to answer these questions or discuss with people, uh, I think the roots are complex, and I believe they stretch back many decades during the colonial period. Um, the European languages were established as instrument of administration, education, and commerce. And so after independence, many African states, they retained English, French, or maybe Portuguese as an official language, with often understandable hopes to foster the national unity and, of course, to maintain the links in the global economy. Uh, Over time, I think this idea has created a very clear hierarchy. For example, if you been colonized, you or maybe you look around, you will realize that there's some former colonial languages. They became strongly associated with opportunity, jobs, and of course modernity. Um, I don't know, but if some parents, you know that some parents who wanted the very best for their children, they made it practical, like a practical choice to prioritize these languages at home. So they started speaking these languages. And of course, if you go to school, or you can relate with this, in many schools, we know children from diverse linguistic backgrounds. Uh, they are now, in most cases, primarily taught in a language they don't speak, or they don't speak fluently, which I think can create a real barrier to learning. So, urbanization, of course, years after independence, the urbanization has intensified the pressure because, as we know, as million people move from villages to cities in search for better lives, the social environment naturally favors a widely spoken language. And if you go to entertainment or media or things we watch on internet, the media and the internet, all these platforms, they shape young minds and they overwhelmingly use the major languages, which leaves a little daily space for these smaller languages. In some cases, very less likely to be spoken. And so, if you don't speak a language over and over again, it definitely is going to extinct. And so, um, one must also acknowledge, of course, some internal dynamic because in some regions that are some languages that are very strong, somehow they contribute to a gradual displacement of some smaller languages in the neighbor through, of course, some economic and cultural influence. Um, because there could be a language in the neighbor, let's say in East Africa, it's a big language like Swahili could displace a lot of smaller languages in the region because uh, by speaking Swahili, you have access to a wide range of speakers, business opportunities. You know, you have this big network of communication that you can be able to express things, and so, and that leaves smaller languages and no room to, to flourish. And so, and I think this is where we now pause and reflect to what actually being lost a language, like if a language is gone away, what is actually the impact? Because I think it's easy for one to just think, oh, we are just losing words. But I think we are losing the entire system of knowledge. And because many of these languages, they contain highly specialized vocabulary for, let's say, local plants, for animals, weather, and the patterns and a lot of things, sustainable land management, a lot of practices, and I think this is a knowledge that could prove invaluable as we confront, let's say, maybe some environmental challenges. I'm sure you've been in a position where you let's say you think of a word, but it doesn't make some sense and it could only be expressed very clearly if you would share it in your own language. But let's say you know a word in Swahili and you want to translate it in English, it can lose sense or it doesn't really meet that expression you wanted to pass around. And that's how powerful languages are. We know languages, if they carry proverbs, they carried stories or some oral histories, and all these things they define the moral framework and a collective memory of a society or a community that speak it. And so for communities themselves, I think the loss of these languages it often brings a deeper cultural and psychological cost because it's going to weaken the connection to ancestors and it's going to diminish a sense of distinct identity.